In my line of work, I have the great fortune of being able to meet a lot of moms. I meet quite a few moms in my line of work. And here's what moms usually say about me. They usually say that I'm cute. And, or they'll say that I'm adorable or handsome, or you just fill in the adjective. This is what they usually say. And how can anybody resist this smile, right? So every time so you get the point. And I met this one mom that was telling me about her son. And she said that she loved her son, of course, but she was telling me about how her son had a number of troubling things that happened in the past, and it really defined their relationship. Didn't diminish the love, but it certainly defined the relationship. She told me how the son, when he was a little boy, he had trouble going through school, got into fights in school, had to go through this thing called detention in his school system, also was suspended several times in his school system, and it just seemed like it was one troubling behavior after another. And so she was trying to figure out how she can best love her son. And so she took him to doctors, and it seems as though the doctors couldn't really figure out how to resolve the complexity. And so she tried a number of things that she hoped would correct his behavior. Nothing seemed to work. He kept going, middle school, similar problems, similar trouble, one thing after another. It got so bad that this mom asked her husband if he would consider taking her son to a stay at an institution for mental health. She got to a breaking point one evening, as she said, where they got into an argument and she couldn't figure out how to love her son well, and she was so frustrated that she actually picked up a shoe to try to throw it at him as he was running out of the door. And so that was enough. And she asked her husband if he would drive him down so that he could have some behavioral cognitive help through what we call a mental institution. She waited for her husband to come back home and to let her know what happened. And when her husband walked in, so did her son. The words that her son said was, "Everything is going to be okay." And some of you by now probably could have guessed that that mom was my mom and that son was me. Reality is that I had a troubling time growing up, but it was only because my personality is unique, just like all of us have unique personalities. And I was just trying to figure out who I was when others were trying to fix me. And I'm grateful for a space like this where you don't have to worry about being fixed, but we can have some self-discovery and even identify things about ourselves that perhaps previously we did not know. And I learned a couple of things. One of the things that I learned was from one of the doctors that I saw. And this particular doctor, he took out a stethoscope, you all know what that is, and he would do what doctors and nurses do. They would put it on the right side, on the front side and on the back side, and they would listen. And I asked one day, I still don't quite know everything that does, but I asked, I said, what is this for as a young boy? And I was told something that has stuck with me. 85% of all diagnoses can be determined just by listening. And so I developed a value of listening. It got me into some trouble, but it was certainly a learning as I was growing up. People would want me to respond and to react a certain way, and often I was just listening. It was my personality. It is who I am. I learned something else. I grew up without any real friends, if you will, like best friends or anything like that. I have an older sister and a younger sister. I have a stepbrother that's much older. Our ages are so far apart that we never really lived together in a home for an extended period of time. and we certainly were in different life stages. And so I just felt like an only child. I wonder if there's anybody in here that can identify with that. Any only children in the building? Yep, a few of you. Just one. All right, two only children. 2 only children. 3, 4, 5. You guys are just now realizing you were the only children, okay? So I felt like that even though I wasn't. And so I started making friends. You know how that works, right? The make-believe friends. And people want to perhaps put you in a box that you shouldn't be talking to yourself because you're talking to an inanimate object or something that's invisible. But I just was fully expressing my personality. And it came to a head one day when I was across the street from my house, and I was in our neighbor's yard. It was an older lady. She was a Caucasian lady, and that matters a little bit to this portion of the story. Older lady, I was in her yard, and I was playing with a little statue that was my height. And I'm much taller now, but that wasn't a joke, but let me pause for a second. There are a lot of people that pick on folks that may not be a certain height. Short people have an advantage. Not that I'm short, but they do have an advantage. One of the first advantages that we have is that we're the last to get rained on. We're the first to drown, but we're the last to get rained on. Nevertheless, I digress. So here I was in this situation, and there was this little statue, and this was my buddy, because I didn't have a brother my age. I didn't have other folks that were my age that were in my neighborhood that I could play with and have friends. And so I had this make-believe statue that was in my neighbor's yard, and it was my height. And it was my buddy, and his name escapes me, but my dad came outside one day, and he noticed that I was playing with this statue, and my dad said, "You can't do that anymore." And I said, "What's wrong? This is my buddy." And he said, "You can't do that because you don't understand, son. This lady, she's a nice lady, but we live in Charleston, South Carolina, which is the home of the Confederacy and the battle place for many battles in the Civil War, and it was where almost half of all of the slaves came from the transatlantic slave trade. And so this particular lady, that's a statue of a slave, and it's not really honoring to you, and she doesn't want you playing with that." And so I lost my best friend. And at the time, it felt like death. And my dad saw the tears that were in my eyes, and he said something that also stuck with me. He said something that is probably very familiar to you. Life is 10% what happens to you, and 90% how you respond. And so there's one other learning that I gained from this experience of growing up. And this happened when I got a little older, and I started playing basketball with some of the older guys that were in my neighborhood. Actually, they were my age, but I was the shorter one, and so I had to be the point guard all the time. So I was the point guard, but I didn't really like that position. I actually liked the position of being the center. And so what I would do is I would play point guard with the guys that were my age, but then when they were done, then the younger guys could come on. And even though these guys were like 5 or 6 years younger than me, I was the tallest one. And so now I'm the big man on the block, and I get the opportunity to play center. And so I'm playing center one day, and I'm playing with this guy named Mikey, and he notices that I'm a little distracted. And the reason why I was distracted is because I actually started liking a girl in the neighborhood, and I didn't know if I'd get her attention so much that she would date me. So I'm playing basketball, but I'm distracted. And I got the young guys around me, and we want to win the game, but I'm distracted. And so Mikey comes up to me and says, "Hey, man, what's wrong? You're not taking your shot." And I said, "I'm good." And he says something that stuck with me. He said, "You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take." And then he said, a big shot is just a little shot that kept shooting. And he thought he was helping me to be a better basketball player, but what he really helped me to do was to take my shot at asking that young lady out on a date. And today, that young lady, which is his sister, is my wife. What a beautiful round of applause. It was like a golf applause, like I'm not sure. But I'm gonna give him a little sympathy because he needed, okay, anyway. So here's what I've learned. I've learned growing up through those experiences. I learned some raised consciousness. I've even learned my purpose in life. I know that my purpose in life is to help others. I know that without a shadow of a doubt, and I feel great about that. I've even learned how to develop and cultivate friendships and a sense of belonging, but there's one thing that I didn't learn until I had the access to a particular tool. I never really learned self-awareness, my identity, my personality, what made me so unique that my mother was willing to ask for professional help and for me to go away for a while. And it wasn't until I developed this tool, I didn't develop it, but I learned about it. It would have been nice if I developed it, but I learned about this tool called the Enneagram. And the Enneagram has its roots in as early as the 4th century. And many of you have heard about the Enneagram. It is one personality construct that is divided into 9 personality types that helps us to understand who we are, our wiring. And the reality of the Enneagram is that it takes these 9 personality types and it divides it based on our basic fears and our basic emotions. This particular test is more of a model than a test or an assessment, but it's often called a test or an assessment. And it really is supposed to help us understand the truest, highest expression of who we are and who we could potentially be. Now, if you are saying, I don't want an assessment, a test, a model, anything of that such to put me in a box because the last thing that I want to be is labeled, you're in great company. Because I am and was just like that when I was first introduced to the Enneagram. The last thing that I want to be is labeled. You all laughed at me hysterically when you thought I was short. The last thing that I want to be is considered someone who's not quite normal because I'm talking to something invisible or to a state. The last thing I want to be is labeled. But the great thing about the Enneagram and many other personality assessments / models is it's not meant to label us. But if you'll just be willing to engage, and we'll do a little work today, it's actually meant to liberate us. Because too often people pick out one thing about us or another thing about us and they say this is who that person is. Whereas the science behind the Enneagram suggests that there are 9 types of people on earth, but we are all interconnected based on our traits, again, divided by our fears, our beliefs, our values. And so it lets us know potentially more about ourselves than we could have ever known. Here's a quick stab at the Enneagram. This is a chart that you should have on your tables in your huddles. And it goes through the 9 personality types. I am going to, for the sake of time, and again, this is just one tool. I'm going to, for the sake of time, go through one of the most efficient ways that master teachers of the Enneagram suggest we attempt to assess ourselves so that we can understand the truest, highest expression of who we are. First, this is a self-assessment. Anyone who tells you, like I told my wife, you must be a 5, you must be a 2, we're doing it all wrong. So, yeah, just no, don't do that. What you really want to do is you want to evaluate this, and you're going to suggest what's most like you. So here's how we'll do it, and I'll use myself as an example, and if you can't see the chart, again, there should be one individually for you on your table in your huddle. So the first type is reformer, second helper, third achiever, individualist, investigator, loyalist, enthusiast, challenger, peacemaker. Let's just use the personality type that I am. I am a challenger. I have self-assessed myself based on how I understand this construct. I'm a challenger, which means I am an 8. The 8 suggests that we have an ego fixation, or all of the types suggest we have an ego fixation, a holy idea, basic fear, basic desire, temptation, vice, virtue. There are times that we deal with stress, and it lets us know how someone of that propensity will deal with it, and then when we feel healthy or when we are secure, what we would do. So going to the 8 category, again, I'm just sharing about myself. My ego fixation is objectification, or how I would better describe it, vengeance. People who fit into my personality type, and again, it is not an exact science, I'm just talking about myself, but people that are similarly situated to me that would also consider themselves that would find a space where they would say it's better to die than to lose something, especially in the midst of a competition, because your ego suggests you've got to exact vengeance, like you've got to figure out something that rights a particular wrong that has been done to you or to someone that you know. And so that's a part of the makeup, but it doesn't tell the full story. My holy idea is truth. My basic fear, based on this typology, is being harmed, controlled, or violated. Basic desire is self-protection. Those of you that have studied the Enneagram, you know that there are some subtopics, and so you'll see self-protection there. That leans into one of the subtopics, and I would challenge you, as you learn more about the Enneagram and yourself, you can do the research, you can take an assessment if you desire, but you'll learn more, and one of the things that you'll learn is self-protection is one of the subtopics that they talk about. The temptation and the vice are what we often call the mask areas. We've been going through this series on mask, and here are the ways that we can be deceitful or manipulative. The temptation for a challenger, based on this typology, is thinking that we're completely self-sufficient. That's the mask that we often wear. And it comes out through lust or forcefulness. There are churches that use this. Catholic churches have been using this for quite a while, hundreds of years, in fact, and they would call this area between the temptation and the vice/passion the sin patterns. But that only tells part of the story. You also have a virtue, and for the challenger, our virtue is innocence. 2 more things on the challenger typology. When you're in stress, a challenger would then go to a 5, which is an investigator, and begin to ask questions, become inquisitive. But when you're in health, when you are feeling safe and secure, you actually help people, which happens to be one of the things that I've discovered the most about myself, that I am a helper, and it has helped me to further define my purpose. So, how does this relate to you? And then we'll have some time in our discussions. How does this relate to you? If you have not taken this, I'm going to give you the quickest way for you to be able to get to a self-assessment. What a lot of the master teachers suggest is for you to look through all 9 of them, which is one of the reasons why we gave this out last time, and we said, hey, you can do the homework if you want to be a little extra studious, but you can do it now if you desire. You look through all 9 of them, and you want to narrow it down to between 2 and 3 if you don't already know your type. So you may say, I may be an individualist, and I might be a loyalist, and I might be a challenger, but I don't know exactly which one, so I'll just narrow it down to those 3. Once you have it narrowed down to 2 or 3, you go to the masked area, which is, again, the temptation, vice/passion, and only one of those that you've narrowed it down should relate to you. This is what the master teacher suggests. Now, this is just, for many of us, the first day for us to lean into this. I want to encourage you to give it a shot. Because if we do, it's an opportunity for us to take off the mask.